A Civil War photo locked away for over a century has just resurfaced, and when experts zoomed in, their faces turned pale. The image shows Abraham Lincoln and General Grant in full color, a feat that science says was impossible in the 1860s. But what shocked historians was the man standing silently between them. A man history swore had vanished days before the war ended. So who was he, and why was the world never meant to see this? Let's dive into. "You need to tell me exactly where you discovered this," said Professor George Kramer, his voice steady as he leaned closer to the faded envelope on Claire's desk. Claire Donovan felt her pulse quicken, caught between excitement and uncertainty. "I already explained," she replied, her throat tightening. It was tucked inside an old trunk, no label, no markings, just resting beneath a stack of railroad bonds and a small box of buttons. The trunk had been sitting quietly in the attic of her family's house for years. At first, Claire had only pulled it aside because she admired the brass latch and the weathered leather straps. Inside, the trunk held what one might expect: well-worn clothing, lace gloves, delicate letters, and a fragile leather-bound album. Claire nearly set the album aside, until one photograph stood out. Unlike the rest, this one was thicker, carefully sealed in wax paper, and carried a faint, unusual scent of dried tobacco blended with old glue. She waited until her cleaning was done before opening it. When she finally did, her breath caught. In remarkable detail, President Abraham Lincoln appeared, tall in his black frock coat and unmistakable top hat. He stood at the far right of the frame beside a simple wooden chair. To his left was General Ulysses S. Grant in uniform, with several Union officers flanking them. They stood firm, sabers at their sides, as if paused mid-conversation. Yet what captivated Claire most was the color. It wasn't tinted or painted. The photograph looked as though it had been captured in full color at the very end of the Civil War. This discovery suggested that Claire's great-great-grandfather had a story far richer than the battlefield medic history recorded. Or perhaps circumstances had placed him where no one expected. If his presence in that photograph was intentional, then it seemed equally intentional that his role had slipped from memory. Faded records, uncertain family whispers, and a photo never meant to resurface pointed to something more deliberate than chance. The silence surrounding Donovan did not appear accidental. It seemed carefully arranged. It was as though a larger force had moved quietly to cover his place in history, until now. Claire suddenly recalled a fragile letter her grandfather once showed her, its paper yellowed and nearly crumbling with age. It had been written by William Donovan himself, long after the war's end. One line stood out with striking clarity: "If ever you find the photograph with the chair, burn it." It was never meant to be kept. In that instant, Claire understood. The photograph was not just a relic of the past, it carried a weight of intention. The air seemed charged, filled with the realization that history was never as unshakable as it appeared. Meanwhile, the laboratory team turned their attention away from Lincoln and Grant, focusing instead on the man between them, the figure history had set aside. Not erased, but carefully obscured. Not forgotten, but strategically withheld. And now, with this photograph revealed, one pressing question rose to the surface: why? If William Donovan had been declared missing, how could he stand beside Abraham Lincoln in an image dated after his disappearance? Kramer murmured that he had never encountered anything quite like the photograph. He reflected that he had taught Civil War photography for 17 years at SUNY Albany and had authored 3 textbooks on 19th century photographic techniques. Leaning closer to the print, he insisted that it should not even exist, gesturing toward it with deliberate care. He explained that color emulsions had not even been theorized until the 1890s, and pointing to the corner of the sheet, he identified it as albumin silver print stock from the 1860s, a process that by definition should not support color. Claire's eyes brightened as she asked if it was a reproduction. Kramer shook his head slowly, his expression sharpening, and stated that the extraordinary part was that it was not fabricated. Claire hesitated before asking whether it could be valuable. Kramer replied that value did not even begin to describe it. If authentic, he said, it would reshape the visual history of the Civil War, adding that the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, and even the British Museum would compete to acquire it. His words left Claire suspended between triumph and uncertainty. Around them, the laboratory team marveled at the brilliance of the photograph, the clarity, the richness of tone, and the chemistry that defied convention. Yet while the others focused on pigments and paper stock, Claire's attention lingered on one detail, the solitary figure standing between Lincoln and Grant. He wasn't like the others. The officers stood stiffly, decked out in well-earned stripes and ceremonial sabers, but this figure appeared understated, no rank displayed, no name she could match to known Civil War portraits. He wore a uniform, yes, but it lacked insignia. His expression was focused, steady, as if he weren't merely part of the photo, but part of something else entirely. Then it hit her. Claire had seen this face before, not in a textbook or an archive, but in a much later photograph from her family collection. She pulled up a scan on her phone, a 1912 image of a man standing outside a barn, one hand resting on a dog's head. He was older and heavier, dressed like a farmer, but the jawline, the ears, the slight slope of the eyebrows, it was him. The same man, standing beside Abraham Lincoln nearly 50 years earlier. "That should be my great-great-grandfather," Claire whispered. Professor Kramer looked up sharply. "What?" She showed him the phone. Kramer leaned toward it, brow furrowed as he compared the two images. "He doesn't appear in any record for the Civil War." Kramer muttered more to himself than to her. "Could be a volunteer, maybe even a civilian caught in uniform." She shook her head. "William Donovan. I remember. There were some stories my grandfather told. His grandfather had served in the Civil War but had disappeared before it was over. No details, just that he never came back. Listed as missing in action." She opened her laptop and began searching for Civil War service records. Minutes later, Donovan William, rank medic, regiment, 104th New York Infantry. Status missing in action. Last seen April 6, 1865. One entry. One note, no explanations. Kramer stared at the screen. April 6th? Just 3 days before Lee's surrender. Claire nodded slowly. So if he disappeared on April 6th, how is he in a photo on April 9th? With Lincoln? At Appomattox? Kramer didn't answer. He was already searching through his own laptop, typing furiously. A few moments later, he looked up. There are no known photographs of Lincoln at Appomattox. Only engravings, sketches, and letters. This mystery was about to get much deeper, because what they discovered next would reveal that William Donovan wasn't just a missing soldier. He was part of something far more secretive than anyone imagined. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. Don't forget to share it with your friends too. It helps the channel out, and I'm excited to continue bringing you more awesome content. At first glance, William Donovan appeared to be an anomaly, present at one of the decisive moments of the Civil War, yet absent from every official roster. He carried no title, no promotion records, and no death notice, only a line marking him as missing in action, April 6, 1865. But what if he had not vanished at all? At the New York Historical Society, Professor Kramer had been buried in War Department files when he called Claire late one night, saying he had found something, and that she needed to come immediately. When she arrived, Kramer showed her a rarely accessed field record from April 1865 that contained a single line, WD, moved to Shadow Post per Al's request. Not to be logged, no weapons drawn unless required. Claire frowned and asked what WD meant. Kramer explained that it stood for the War Department and added that Al was almost certainly Lincoln, noting that some of his aides had used the nickname in private notes. The room fell silent as they realized that what had begun as a misfiled photograph was now linked to an official document suggesting that Lincoln might have created an informal unit in his final days, one that operated outside the formal chain of command. As they dug deeper, they found a field journal that described escorts chosen from outside regular ranks, men assigned to discrete movements between command zones. These men carried no insignia or papers, only quiet orders to observe, report, and protect key figures, including the president himself. Claire, stunned, asked whether this meant Lincoln had built his own network. Kramer nodded and admitted that while there had always been rumors, This was the first substantial evidence he had ever encountered. The strongest proof, however, came not from written records but from fabric. Elsa, the forensic imaging specialist, froze as she scanned Donovan's coat and zoomed in on the collar, revealing a small, stitched patch hidden beneath the lapel that read PEC. Kramer leaned in and identified it as the Presidential Escort Committee. Elsa went pale and protested that no such committee existed. Kramer replied that it did not officially exist, but he had seen coded references to it in communications and even in personal diaries of Lincoln's aides. He explained that, near the end of his presidency, Lincoln had not fully trusted his cabinet and had wanted his own eyes and ears in the field. The insignia, he said, proved Donovan had not disappeared but had been reassigned under Lincoln's direct authority. The discovery raised troubling questions: why the secrecy, why the lack of records, and why Donovan had been placed so prominently in a historic photograph only to vanish from memory. Kramer sighed and remarked that Lincoln had known the war's end would be fragile. The president had needed loyal men, not generals or politicians, but shadows, men like Donovan. It was then that the empty wooden chair in the photograph took on a new meaning, no longer a simple prop, but a deliberate marker, a space left open in case of danger, ready for someone like Donovan to act. Had Claire not examined it closely, history might have overlooked it entirely. Yet the true revelation still lay hidden beneath Donovan's patch, a secret message, a single line of stitching that could chill anyone who read it. The image had already raised questions about hidden networks, secret assignments, and an unknown figure beside Abraham Lincoln. But at the New York Historical Society lab, a discovery shifted the photo from mysterious to chilling. Elsa, the forensic imaging expert, was scanning William Donovan's uniform when she noticed faint stitching beneath the tiny Peck insignia. It wasn't a repair. It was deliberate. Adjusting the spectral scanner, she revealed words sewn in thread just lighter than the coat: target verified. Stand until April 14th. The room froze. April 14th, 1865, was the night Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Claire stepped back, stunned. Kramer stared at the screen in disbelief, but there was no misreading it. The message suggested Donovan, Claire's great-great-grandfather, had not only been near Lincoln but assigned to guard him until the night of his death. Mason, the conservator, said the target verified sounded like an assignment, not a routine patrol. Elsa added that standing implied a time frame. Donovan seemed to have been part of a last line of defense, perhaps even a witness to the threat itself. His disappearance from records no longer looked like a tragedy. It looked like a cover-up. Claire remembered Donovan's old warning: if you ever find the photo with the chair, burn it. Now it made sense. The photo wasn't just evidence of his presence, but proof of foreknowledge. Maybe even of failure. The timing made it worse. Records showed Donovan had been transferred to the Shadow Post 3 days before Lee's surrender on April 9th. That photograph had captured him mid-assignment, alive, present, ordered to remain until April 14th. After that, there was nothing. Claire whispered that he was supposed to stop it. Kramer stayed silent. Perhaps Donovan failed. Perhaps he waited for orders that never came. Or perhaps, darker still, he was eliminated before he could act. What was certain was that someone had stitched that message, knowing what was about to happen. No one could say whether it was intended for Donovan alone or as a hidden trail for others. The photograph, once dismissed as a curiosity, had become something far more dangerous. And one more question remained: was Donovan's silence before he could act? If so, the strange technology that created the impossible photograph might hold the final clue. For days, the focus had been on the faces in the photo: Lincoln, Grant, and the mysterious William Donovan. But after the hidden message beneath Donovan's lapel came to light, Elsa, the forensic imaging expert, turned her attention to something just as baffling: the photograph itself. From the beginning, everyone agreed it looked wrong. Too clear, too modern, and the color defied explanation. Civil War photographs were black and white. Color photography wasn't even theorized until the 1890s, let alone executed. So how could this exist? Elsa ran the image through spectral scanning to isolate pigment data, and the results pushed the mystery further. It wasn't hand-tinted, nor post-printed. The pigments were embedded in the emulsion at the time of development. Mason, The paper conservator protested that albumin silver stock from the 1860s could not take chromogenic dyes. Elsa admitted it shouldn't be possible, yet this one had. Her analysis revealed layers of gum arabic, animal-based binders, and most astonishingly, organic pigments like beetroot and indigo. Common in cloth dyeing of the era, they had never been documented in photography. Mixed with oil-reactive compounds and exposed under precise conditions, the chemicals bonded long enough to hold color. Fragile, experimental, and far beyond public use, yet undeniably real. Claire whispered that it wasn't just a photo, it was a prototype. Kramer agreed. Searching overlooked records, Elsa found a journal entry from 1866 by an assistant to Timothy O'Sullivan, one of the Civil War's leading photographers. It read, "The president requested one unique chromatic plate for his legacy image. There shall be no demonstration. Private development advised." The implication was startling. Lincoln, less concerned with vanity than with preservation, might have commissioned a one-of-a-kind photographic experiment. Not for propaganda or archives, but as a time capsule, an image carrying not only likenesses but also hidden marks and techniques meant for the future. And who better to carry such a record than someone outside official ranks, someone trusted to remain silent until the time was right? Donovan's role may have been more than protection. He could have been the carrier, guarding a photograph engineered with purpose, a document holding the president's final secrets. Yet one question lingered. If secrecy was the goal, why had Donovan kept it? Why instruct his family to destroy it? Why did it resurface only now? Claire finally had part of the answer when she discovered a single folded page tucked in the photo album's lining. A note signed simply Al. The photo was now stored in a high-security vault under the care of the New York Historical Society. But copies, with every detail preserved, began circulating quietly among historians. Claire's decision not to sell it brought headlines. But it wasn't about publicity. It was about finishing something her great-grandfather started. Within a week, the Smithsonian reached out. The Library of Congress requested access to the high-resolution scans, but Claire declined all offers until she found something even more shocking. Buried in the folds of the original photo album, tucked behind a weathered envelope, was a handwritten letter addressed simply to William from Al. It was dated April 10th, 1865, just 4 days before the assassination. Claire held the brittle paper in gloved hands as Kramer read aloud. "My dear William, if this war taught us anything, it's that truth rarely survives the men who need it most. You were not chosen to draw your sword, but to stand visible among the ones who do. What we do with peace will test us more than what we did with war. So stand where they don't expect you." William Donovan wasn't erased by history. He had walked straight into it without recognition, without rank, without reward. And now, after 100 years buried in a trunk, his silent service was finally seen. But the letter revealed something even more profound. Lincoln knew. He knew that the peace would be more dangerous than the war itself. He knew that powerful forces would try to shape the aftermath. And he knew that men like William Donovan, invisible to history but loyal to truth, would be the only ones he could trust when everything else fell apart. The letter wasn't just a farewell. It was an assignment that extended beyond Lincoln's life. Stand where they don't expect you. Watch who you must. Donovan had been tasked not just with protecting Lincoln, but with preserving something larger, the truth itself. And that's exactly what he had done. For over a century, the photo had waited, hidden, protected, until the right moment. Until someone who understood its significance could bring it into the light. When the story first broke of a Civil War photo in full color, of a forgotten man standing beside Abraham Lincoln, historians didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't just because the image shattered known photographic timelines. It was because the story behind it did something even rarer. It revealed a piece of history no one had asked to find. But Claire Donovan knew the truth was never meant to stay buried. She declined every offer from major networks, private collectors, and even academic institutions because the photo wasn't for sale. It had never been meant for that. This wasn't about headlines or documentaries or digital scans passed around for clicks. It was about something sacred, a promise made across generations, kept in silence, and finally brought into the light. Instead, Claire partnered with the New York Historical Society to create something more personal, a public exhibit that didn't glorify war or even focus on Lincoln. It was called The Man Who Stood Anyway. The centerpiece was a replica of the mysterious photograph, now enlarged to its full dimensions, encased in glass and lit gently from behind. Visitors could finally see it all: Lincoln's tired eyes, the dust on the boots, the empty wooden chair, and the quiet man in the middle, William Donovan. Beside it stood a full biography panel, not one that had ever existed in textbooks, but one reconstructed through records, letters, and the photo itself. A timeline of his military service, his abrupt disappearance, the final War Department field note referencing the shadow post, and of course the letter from Al. And that, in the end, was Donovan's legacy. Not as a general, not as a war hero in the public eye. He was someone who carried something heavier than any rifle or saber, a secret, a burden of watchfulness and patient waiting while history happened all around him. Claire stood in the background that first week of the exhibit. She watched school groups, former soldiers, and casual visitors pass through. Most had never heard of Donovan, but they stopped, and they stayed. Some read the letter twice. Others simply stared at the photograph in silence. The exhibit drew visitors from across the country. Civil War enthusiasts, photography experts, genealogy researchers, and curious families all came to see the man who stood anyway. They came to understand that history isn't just about the famous names we remember, but about the quiet figures who shaped events from the shadows. Some visitors left flowers by the display. Others wrote notes in the guest book, thanking William Donovan for his service, even though he had been gone for over a century. Children asked their parents why he looked so serious. Adults wondered what secrets he had carried to his grave. What would you do if you found proof that the past wasn't what we thought it was? Would you hide it or show the world? The choice that Claire Donovan made reminds us that some truths are too important to keep buried, no matter how long they've been hidden. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being with us. Leave a comment, like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more exciting videos. See you next time.